Welcome to the Date Forever podcast. Keep your relationship fueled up with strategies discovered by couples and experts. Because at Fuel Collective, we believe better relationships will equal a better world. You are about to discover specific insights and tools that cost little or nothing to implement to help you date forever. And now, here are your hosts, a couple who always have a half-packed suitcase and a date night in the calendar, Sammy and Nathan Yeager.
Hello and welcome to Date Forever. In this week's episode, we're chatting about what is trauma and how does it show up in our lives, understanding our own and our partner's triggers, and taking full responsibility for ourselves and not blaming others for our emotions and reactions. But before we get into it, Sammy, what's been fueling you up this week?
Ooh, lockdown week 9.
9? Yeah, 10?
I think it's 9. Maybe it's
I think we're
more.
into week 10 now.
New South Wales, we are just crushing it.
Killing it, yeah.
So I think that some of my friends may have been feeling the energy vibes like wriggling off me, like you imagine a cartoon that smells bad.
Yeah,
I think that was me last week, but with bad juju. Because I say this because some of my beautiful friends showered me in presents. I got the most amazing mushroom Messina ice cream cake you've ever seen. Like just OTT extravaganza ice cream cake. And I like ice cream, but I love Messina.
Yeah.
Not just their ice cream and products, but them as a brand, as a business. Just love what they do and how they do it. But I'd never had one of these cakes before. And one of my beautiful girlfriends, Jess, who's also in lockdown life in Victoria, sent me this incredible cake. And I think it just fueled me up so much because I haven't had a novel, unique experience for a really long time.
No,
everything's been very same, and this just was a total out of the ordinary moment.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, and then some of our friends from South Australia who are looking at us with pitying eyes sent us this beautiful hamper. So shout out to Cass and Kieran from Char in the Barossa Valley, South Australia. So spoiled.
Yeah, really big hamper of goodies.
Yeah. And then if you've ever watched any of our little video snippets on Instagram, you've probably noticed the Toy Story family that sits behind us. But I'm a bit of a Disney Toy Story fangirl. One of my girlfriends, Jess, sent me the cutest little earrings. They're so ridiculously, hilariously cute, and I love them. So they're like little faces of Woody and Buzz, and I'm going to mix them up.
They are pretty cute, aren't they?
Oh, yeah, Pixar and Disney take more of everyone's money. I love it. Thanks, Jess. So my love language of gifts has been delighted this past week. I think those have been the fuel ups, the moments of connection with my friends who have seen my discomfort and shown love in a way that they can at the moment and in a way that I really appreciate. Yeah, what about you, Nath? What fueled you up this past week?
I got a haircut.
Yes, you did.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Sammy gave me a haircut. That was the...
Yeah, it wasn't underground.
No, but thanks to one of our good friends, Lisa, who gave us a Zoom lesson on haircutting.
Yes, shout out to Stunning by Lisa.
Yeah, thanks heaps, because it was getting pretty critical, wasn't it?
Yeah, it wasn't good.
No.
It was not good at all. No. And it was... I feel like your hair grows faster the longer that it gets, which is like the opposite of my hair. I feel like the longer mine gets, the slower it grows.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm feeling good now. I've got a fresh fade. Yeah, feeling good in my own body, which I think is definitely helping me get through this lockdown period. It was feeling pretty long and overgrown, and I was feeling not all that great in my body. So
yeah, it wasn't great. It wasn't, and the attraction was dropping. Like, let's be a little bit honest.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, but also appreciation for people who have skills, right? We all have different skills, different strengths, whatever the thing is. But like this haircut that probably would have taken my girlfriend Lisa like 12 minutes took me an hour and a half.
Yeah. It was a slow process. Probably didn't help by the $27 clippers or something, which I bought. that definitely wasn't the best tools we could have been using, but it did the job. And hopefully it'll do the job for, one or maybe two more haircuts. And, and that's all it needs to.
Depending how long we stay in lockdown.
Yeah,
but yes, I think it was a good reminder that sometimes it's okay to just outsource stuff. It's okay to outsource things. If you don't like it, you're not good at it, you're inefficient at it, outsource it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's also a good reminder for taking care of ourselves.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and just feeling good in your body. And I've noticed too that getting up in the morning, it's definitely worthwhile, like putting on some decent clothes and getting out of your trackies and feeling good. It just does help to kind of elevate your mood rather than mooching around in your snugglies all day.
Yeah, it's super important to take care of ourselves and always, but especially if you're in lockdown at the moment, make sure that you're taking care of yourself inside and out.
But now, here's this week's guest.
Today we're welcoming Kerry Howard. She is a best-selling author, psychologist, and executive coach. Kerry, or Miss Pink herself, has not only made this personal transformation for herself, but has also worked with 500 clients, assisting them to transform their lives. Welcome to the show, Kerry.
Thank you for having me.
So as a bit of a starting point, can you just tell us a bit about your books?
So my first book was called Define Your Inner Diva, which I wrote modelled on my own life, I think. But I talked about covering off the 6 areas of life that you really need to look at if you wanted to live your best life. So it starts off talking about yourself and then looking at your relationships. And then it looks into things like career, finances, and then that sort of health side of things, and finishes up with spirit. And the reason that I did that is because if you want to do a whole of life transformation, they're the kind of 6 areas that you need to look at in order to be able to pick up on what you want to change in any of them. So that was the first book. And then the second book was a bit of a fun book. It was just a book on, it's called Why Men Are Like Shoes. And it was actually the first book I ever wrote, believe it or not. And it was based on a story I used to tell my daughters when my marriage broke down. And I had the girls most of the time, and I had 2 daughters. So, well, I still do have 2 daughters. And so I had 2 daughters, but then they were like 6 and 8. And, you know, every second weekend they would spend that time with their dad. And I would, when I started dating again, my youngest, she would say, you know, are you dating tonight, Mum? Are you going on a date? And I'd say, yes. And she'd be like, when do we get to meet him? And I'd say, well, you don't until I've spent a bit of time with him myself. And she'd be like, why? And she's, you know, a little bit insistent. She could take after her mother, I suppose. But she would say, no, we want to meet him because, you know, you shouldn't be able to decide without our input at 6.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's a group decision.
And so I said, Alicia, I'm just shoe shopping. And she's like, what? And I said, well, you know when you go into the shops and you just kind of, you see the beautiful pair of stilettos in the window of the shop and you go, I must have them. But you put them on, they pinch your toes, they hurt your feet, they're really uncomfortable and they're really expensive. So you don't really want to buy those. And so the alternative might be that you think you want some because you like comfortable things. So you might want to go and buy a pair of, you know, Colorado loafers, like slip-on shoes or whatever, but then you can only wear them with your jeans. So somewhere along the line, you have to decide if you want to buy a pair of shoes that goes with most things in your wardrobe. You need to know what's in your wardrobe and you need to know what sort of shoes is going to kind of, you know, work for the longevity of that kind of commitment. And some women just like multiple pairs of shoes.
And men also like different kinds of shoes.
Absolutely. So the reverse one of that, which is still in my head, I've got to write it, but it's called Why Women Are Like Cocktails. I started off saying why women are like alcohol, but then I went, we're far more complex than just one single kind of drink. So a bit mixed up. It's good though. I think it provides a bit of mysterious kind of bit around women that men will never understand. And that's probably a good thing.
So, psychologist and executive coach, how did you get interested in doing this kind of work?
You wouldn't believe it. Well, Sammy, I think you probably would. But at 19, I met with a TV producer. This is serious. And I sort of said to him, I had this real sort of desire to help people. I thought I could be like Australia's version of Oprah. That was always my kind of thing, because I really wanted to have that sort of thing where I could feel like I was really helping people. And it just felt like something that was a really important thing for me to do. And he looked at me and he said, Kerry, I think you've probably got the charisma to pull it off, but where's your validity? And I was like, my validity. What am I going to do for that? So then I decided I better go back to uni and get myself some validity. So I decided to go and do psychology. But in the process, I had couple of kids and I was working full time in the end in the public service and doing some really interesting stuff for the community, but still studying part time. And it literally took me 15 years to finish my degree and get fully qualified.
Psychology is a
doing
biggie.
it alongside.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it was a big one. And yeah, but it's also interesting because then when I became a psychologist, I actually felt like I put myself in this box that I was really, because there's a whole bunch of rules that a lot of people don't understand about being a health professional in this country. That means that you can't be as open as you would like to be about certain things. And so, I might give it up soon.
Kerry, I really like that you shared this, because there's something that I'm trying to work through in my personal life with a relationship dynamic that I want it to be different. And I knew that I needed outside help to move forward because I was coming at it from all the different angles. And I made the decision that I wanted to go and see a coach, not a psychologist, for that reason. I want someone who's going to be open and swear at me if I need to hear that.
Well, because psychologists can't even touch you, right? Let alone give you a hug even if they wanted to. There's a whole bunch of stuff. And this came home to roost, honestly, Sammy. Have you ever heard of a place called Quest for Life in Bundanoon?
No.
Quest for Life is a place in Bundanoon that was set up by Petrea King, and she's a really amazing woman. She started out doing things for people who had cancer, but more recently she does programs like 5-day residentials or 2-day residentials for people who have PTSD and some of those other things. And because I'm a trauma specialist, at the end of the day, that's the main thing that I tend to focus on, although that touches all areas of our life. When I went to see her about doing some facilitation for them, she was explaining to me that every single person in their program actually has gone through the program themselves, and then they'll come back and work in the program. And I was sitting there thinking, and I ended up saying to her, I said, it's so wonderful to see, but as a psychologist, it actually makes me really sad because I can't do that. I'm not allowed to. I'm actually legally prevented from being able to work with people that I've seen or be friends with them or do any of these things because somehow it's perceived as being this sort of power differential that causes a real issue. And that's a big part of it, I think, why I'm with you, Sammy. I think sometimes life coaching used to sound rather la-la, but I think there's some real benefit in somebody who, truly gets to understand who you are, what you want, where your aspirations are, and gives you some clear guidance and support about how you get there, right? And people need to, sometimes we do need to be honest. But if you do have to watch your eyes, dot your I's and cross your T's, you can't
and maintain your insurance.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a big part of that, isn't there? So it's interesting because I certainly think I'm in a space of sort of pivot at the minute, and that's part of what I'm really thinking about. So I'm about to go on holidays. I've been on holidays for nearly a week now, technically, but I don't call moving office a holiday. So I'm looking at what's next and where to from here, because I honestly feel, especially post-COVID, that trying to help humanity solve the issues that we have in a one-on-one way is, well, to me, and I'm glad you said that, there's a swearing thing on this, because to me it feels like pissing on a bushfire. And I can't really, I get very frustrated kind of feeling like we need to be able to do more.
Play bigger, impact more, reach more people.
Absolutely. And the impact part of it is I think really important. And it's another reason, coming back to the, not wanting to be a psychologist anymore, the psychology side of things, I've developed software that I could use to help people help themselves. There's some other things that if I did that under the sort of psychologist banner, they try and deregister me anyway. So there's a big part of step away from that so that we can help more people, because I don't really believe that the dependency model does any benefit to anybody much except the person who's getting paid for it.
Yeah. Hey, so in your bio, we mentioned that you went through a big transformation yourself and that you help others do that. Can you tell us a little bit about where you were at pre-transformation?
Oh, well, I kind of think it's an interesting one. There's several transformations I think we can do in life. And I don't think just because you went through one, that's the end of it, I must say. I think there's lots of pivot points in your life. But the main thing that happened started off when I was 28. I got hit by a bus as a pedestrian. And it's a bit of those people that talk about your whole life flashes before your eyes. Well, absolutely it did. And my girls at that point were just like 2 and 4. And it was a big, big deal. And the reason that it had such a negative impact is because to begin with, I could not understand why because I didn't look one way. And I was late at night, like there was no buses. We were in Sydney. I, at that point, lived in a country town. Like there's a whole bunch of anxiety around what I was doing and where I was. And so that meant that I didn't look one way. So I didn't even look at this oncoming bus. And I beat myself up for hours and hours and hours trying to understand why. And long story short, there had been an earlier thing in which I'd had a conversation with my friend in which I'd filed away the idea that the bus lane was one way. And when I came to that conclusion, I was like, oh, that made sense. But it really unraveled a whole bunch of things, because when we blame ourselves for our traumatic experiences, what happens is that it starts to really erode our mental health, because all of the other times in our life where we felt like we'd done something that was stupid or whatever comes back to haunt you. But this time you could have died here. And not only were you stupid, but you were stupid and nearly killed yourself. So it had a really big impact. And I ended up with post-traumatic stress and secondary depression. And part of the reason that I then became the kind of therapist that I became later on was because I'd had EMDR therapy back then, and I was really so impressed with the ability to be able to resolve a lot of the issues that I had repressed up until that point in my life. And it just felt like an opportunity to really kind of clean out the old toy box, the cupboard, the whatever you want to call it, of all of the things that had happened to me up until that point. And it was probably just as well. I had young children. I married young. I married at 21. So there were lots of things that then started to make sense to me about why I'd made decisions that I had, which in the end, my marriage wasn't really working very well. And I got out of it a few years later. But yeah, it was a really pivotal kind of moment. But it allowed me to see that no matter how bad things get, that we always have an opportunity to recover. We just need to make the choice to do that. And I don't think we educate people enough to understand it.
Yeah. So what actually is trauma, and how does it occur?
In my case, a lot of people will talk about trauma as in big T trauma, people have car accidents, get raped, get held up in whatever. But there's a whole bunch of little T, what we used to call the little T trauma. But basically in my latest book, which is called The Trouble with Trauma, so this one here, I actually talk about the fact that we all experience trauma in our lives. There is not one human being on the planet that has not experienced traumatic events. Now, why this becomes a bit of a challenge is because what trauma does is it creates a disconnect, and our primary emotional need as human beings is for connection. So when you understand that, right, we talk about relationships, then the biggest threat to the relationship is actually the disconnect. So anything that causes a feeling of impending disconnection starts to undermine the relationship connection. And so we have these emotional reactions and responses that are based on our childhood experiences and how well we had how well we were attached to our parents, and then we play them out in our adult life. But we don't teach people that that's what we do. And we also don't teach people that if we cleaned out the kind of collection of negative traumatic events that we built on to that point, which we can do routinely, by the way, if we taught people to do it all the time, I actually believe that we would not have any mental health issues at all.
Wow. Yeah.
Wow, Kerry, that's really powerful.
Yeah.
So we've moved through life as small baby to toddler to child age, and then we've become a teenager, and at some point, maybe early 20s, maybe early 30s, maybe later in life, we've met a person who's had their own series of traumatic events, whether or not they're big T or little t. And then we've met them and we've either stepped into love or fallen into love, or we've started to have a romantic relationship with this person, and they've got their shit and I've got my shit, and that shit starts to rub up against each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell us, how do we do that well? How do we do that effectively?
Well, it's a really interesting one because, I always say to people, everybody's got their baggage, right? But I'm tired of meeting people who've got a shipping container. I want somebody with a wheel aboard.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Because it's tricky, but it happens. And, we know that people come into, we've all got stuff that's happened to us, right? But it's really interesting because I think the biggest indicator of whether or not you're with somebody who's going to be good to get into a relationship with has an awful lot to do with how well they understand themselves and how well they can kind of look introspectively at the circumstances that they've come from and then take some ownership about the triggers that might bring into the relationship. So a good example is, it was said to my daughter, she'd been through this, they're older now. She'd been through quite a difficult relationship, but she was externalizing everything. So she'd worked out what she needed, but she would tell everybody else that they had to give it to her. And one of the things I talk about in the new book is that you can know what you need, but you can't demand it from somebody and get annoyed with them because they won't give it to you. You can only ask for it. And if they won't give it to you, you need to then work out how you get that need met elsewhere, or you choose not to be in that relationship and move on to another one where you may or may not get that need met. And, you might find there's some other problems. So it's a balance, but the biggest part of this is actually our own self-awareness. So anytime that we're angry or upset with a partner or anybody that we have a connection with through work or family or whatever, we're usually reacting to something that they're doing, but it's because of how it's making us feel. And we've got to be able to get to the root kind of base of how it's making us feel and take ownership for how we resolve it. Because not really my partner's problem if I feel that they're withdrawing from me because of some behavior, unless I've talked to them about that behavior and we've worked out a way that we can, he or she, depending on the case maybe, might be willing to help me resolve that. Does that make sense?
Mm.
Yeah, it does.
So where do we build that muscle of self-awareness? How do we start to develop that?
Funny you should talk about muscle because I've just developed a 12-week program called the Mental Muscle Method. And in essence, it's essentially based on the same stuff that I talk about in The Trouble with Trauma, but it's broken down to help people first understand, where our mental health gets impacted by our early childhood experiences. And then when we want to build awareness about it, how do we do that? How do we kind of move our way forward so that we can kind of recognize when we are having issues either in our relationships with our intimate partner or, at work or with family or whatever? Because we talk about in a traumatic sense, we get triggered, but a lot of people will know their triggers and then they kind of still externalizing, telling somebody else, you've got to fix that for me. And we do this a lot in our intimate relationships. But actually, we've just got to recognize the trigger, know why it's there, and then kind of help the other person to help us to resolve it. But we can only ask them, right? And I remember one of my more recent relationships, I might have had a few, by the way. So in it, I felt like I got to a point where I was much more self-aware. I was aware of the fact that if I felt this other person was withdrawing, my tendency was to push them right? I would want to push them away. And that was about my own abandonment stuff, right? So I gave permission. I went into this relationship and I said, look, this is what I do. I know that this is what I do. So if I feel that you're withdrawing and I don't really know what's happening, I'm likely to push. So if something happens and I withdraw, because before I push, I withdraw. So if you notice I've withdrawn and you come and ask me what's wrong, and I say nothing, I'm fine, okay, just leave it there, because I am going to take responsibility to tell you that when I've worked out what's wrong, I will come back to you and tell you, and then we can work it out. So, and that was because over years of doing it the other way, I kind of like, I'm out of here, and I didn't want to do that anymore. I wanted to be able to work through what it was that I needed. And so it was pretty good and it worked reasonably well. And there was this particular day, I still remember, one of my friends, her partner had died, and it was sad. It was only, he had cancer, and they'd only been together a couple of years. And so a lot of my sort of girlfriends who were single or had been in that sort of single scene at different points sort of through their 40s, we all went to the funeral to support our friend. And at the, I'd only been going out with this partner for a few months, right? And at the funeral, all the girls were asking me where I met him because, he was so nice. I think this is funny. He was so nice. They had it, if they went on the same website, maybe they'd meet somebody just as nice, which didn't make any sense in my brain, right? But that's how they think. And they were all telling me how lovely he was. And I didn't realize at that moment, but I worked it out later. In the back of my mind was that little voice that popped up and said, yep, too nice for you, right? Now, at a rational level, my brain goes, that's not true, right? But there's still that part of me that was still feeling like, and I talk about this in the new book as that child part, that was still feeling like ultimately I would be rejected. Ultimately, he would find something that was wrong with me and he wouldn't want to be around. And so when I went back to his place that night and I walked in the door and we're having a joke and I said, yeah, so when you're done with me, there's half a dozen of them lining up, right? Because they all think that you're wonderful. And that was funny. And then something else happened and I said, yeah, when this relationship is over, blah, 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 blah. And then something else happened and then I said, oh, yeah, well, when we're done, and on the third time, it was good. He called me out. He's like, hang on, what's going on? Like, that's the third comment that you've made about when this relationship
projecting
is over.
The end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I went, oh, you're right. Let me just, I'll take that one under advisement.
Let me put it under the microscope and I'll figure it out.
That's it. And I'd worked out by that stage that usually if I slept on it, by the time I was kind of through the shower the next morning, I'd usually worked out what the problem was. And I'd said to him I would take ownership of that and I would go back to him and say, okay, so what happened was blah. And so I went back to him the next day and I'm like, okay, so when I went to the funeral and I kind of gave him they were all saying how nice he was, I had triggered within me this sense of, oh, yeah, too good for you. And he was kind of going, that was silly. And I'm like, yeah,
I know.
Let me finish. I know it's silly. But it's the 4-year-old inside my brain who doesn't think that it's silly. It's the 4-year-old who thinks nobody really wants to love her because, she's too out there and too loud and too noisy and too, I don't know what, and just not good enough is really what it comes down to. And we all have that within us at some level. And I was able to say to him, this is why I reacted. But I was also able to say to him, so I'm really sorry that ended up being projected on you. And thank you for actually calling me out on it because I'd given him permission to do it. And when he did it, I thanked him for doing it for me because it allowed us to have this open communication and that made the relationship easy. It was really funny. Actually, at the end of the relationship, he said to me, this is the easiest relationship I've ever had because you had this ability to be able to be open and communicative. The issue with the relationship was that I was open and communicative, but he wasn't. So it was all where I thought everything was okay. He was just burying stuff. So that was a real eye-opener for me about just because I'm open and communicative doesn't necessarily mean that the other person is being open and communicative. Sometimes I need to have another way to check that.
So they were showing you the carry-on luggage, not the shipping container.
Yeah. It was kind of like oh, look, nothing to see here. Look, it's beautiful. Like I cleaned out the shipping container. I'm selling it on, but actually it was just,
Surprise, I moved it to another one.
No, buried underground, right? We're talking bunker style here. And I laugh. He was military. And there's a part of my brain that kind of says, yeah, well, all that stuff you're not allowed to talk about. So he just learnt not to talk about anything. It's hard.
So, Kerry, you've mentioned a lot about doing that internal reflection and like understanding your own triggers. So how would you deal with a partner? Like if you've seen that they've been triggered, like how do you go about actually dealing with that? Because you kind of mentioned a little bit about having a dialogue of your partner calling it out when you are triggered. So how do we go about setting up that agreement or something in the first place?
Yeah, well, as I said, I'd known myself a bit better by then. So when I went into that relationship, I was able to say, so this is what I do. And so when you see it, please feel free to call me out. And I had to then take the ownership of coming back and telling him what the issue was. Now, you're right, because in reverse, there were things that I noticed, but he would deny or divert away from or whatever. So you can there's only so many ways that you can try and get people. I often say it's hard to get people to look in a mirror, right? You're trying to hold the mirror up to them going, hey, this is what happens every time we do this. Look over here. And they're going, no, it's not me. It's not me. It's you, right? And that's a really challenging space because we have to take ownership of our own reactions and like the response that we would have. And we have to take that and work with it and be able to identify to a partner that's how it's impacting me and that's why I'm reacting this way. But a lot of people don't have that introspection. It takes a long time to develop that because it's a real self-awareness, right? And it takes quite a while to develop self-awareness. And I'd love to sit here and say I've done a lot of therapy and I've done, I'm aware. Yes, I'm aware, but I still have those reactions sometimes. I've resolved a lot of it for myself, but classic case in point, a couple of months ago, and it was for a range of reasons, but April was a bit tough for me. And I contacted my supervisor, read therapist, right? And we tap into that feeling and it's kind of like the same thing came up. It's this child within me that feels rejected and unwanted and abandoned. And I was literally in this, I've written about it in the book. I've got a thing called the self-management system. It identifies our primary ego part that causes all of this abandonment reaction is a 4-year-old, right? I know her very well. I have several versions of her, but yet again, when we tapped into it, it was yet another version. And it goes back to yet another early childhood experience in which I blamed myself for being the source of the problem. Because what 4-year-olds do, see, the 4-year-old is really an interesting point. A lot of people say, why 4? Because 4 is the first time that you can recognize yourself as an individual separate from your parents, right? But you also in that see your parents as they're idealized, they're perfect. And so as a result, any problem is your problem. You're responsible. You're the one who must have caused the problem. And you take ownership of all of the things that go wrong. And that's the problem because as a child, you also have concrete thinking. So good things happen because you're good and bad things because you're bad. End of story. So when we take that and we don't understand it, and that's a big part of why the latest book, a lot of people who would never have considered themselves traumatized Melinda Hurd was one, Sammy, I don't know if you
I do know Melinda.
So
fabulous headshot photographer, if anyone's looking.
Yes, she is. And videographer for anybody who needs it. So I was doing some stuff with her, left her with a book, and she came back to me and she's like, Kerry, my goodness, everybody needs to read this book. I said, oh, well, don't say that just because. And she's like, no. I would never have considered myself traumatized, but actually because of the way I outlay it in the book, it explains how we get to be like this and how we get to understand and manage our own system so that when we're interacting with others, we're not having this constant kind of reactivity stuff around the connection. And really, the trauma comes because of the threat of the disconnect. So I always laugh when we talk about people. Why do we get into arguments as couples? I get this all the time in private practice. And I'm like, we always fight about the same thing. And I'm kind of like, well, usually it's because you've set an expectation that the other person should know what's wrong with you, right? And women are really good at this, right? I'm mad and I'm not talking to you, but when you come and ask me what's wrong, I say, I'm fine, nothing. Sammy, you would never do that, would you?
I'm getting heaps better at it. I'm getting heaps better at it. But I think if I'm still in that processing time where I haven't figured it out yet, or I can't articulate it for myself, then it's probably not a very well positioned I'm fine when I'm not fine, but I haven't yet found the words to articulate what it is that's wrong.
Right. Yeah, and that's it. And I want you to think about it. Sometimes that not fine and can't articulate it behaves like a 2-year-old, right? Because that's what 2-year-olds do. They can't articulate it. They're not happy. So they throw a tantrum, okay? Because they don't have the words. They can't find the words. As we get older, we get better at managing our tantrum, right? But in the end, there's a reaction that's happened. You're triggered and you've got to take a moment to kind of go, what just happened? Now, what tends to happen, the other thing between men and women that's quite different, and I don't know if anybody's ever told you this, but women always win arguments. And the reason is literally biological, because men have an emotion lobe on one side of their brain and a communication lobe on the other. So literally for the man to think about how he feels about something and then find the words to articulate it, it's got to cross over the midline of the brain and go back again. Women actually have one of each on each hemisphere. So they have a communication and an emotion lobe, one on each hemisphere. So their brain's doing this real quick while the guy's going, I got to cross this bit. I don't know what I'm feeling. Don't ask me because I'm confused. By which stage she's running rings around him, right? So a lot of women.
Nate's nodding in agreement, like, yeah.
We have to understand sometimes then, because what women will do is when you hit this kind of escalation point, whatever it is, women want to keep talking it out, right? And the guy's sitting there kind of going, I can't work out what I'm thinking or what I did wrong or whatever. And he kind of needs a little bit of time. But women are kind of like, no, I want this sorted out now. Don't you walk away from me. He's trying to get out to the shed to kind of work out his brain for a minute. And she's just kind of chasing him out to the shed and kind of going, but why did you do that? It's like, my brain I can't work out why. I don't know why.
Thinking is hard.
It is hard, right? Because emotional stuff is hard. You need a little bit of time. But the problem is that when we're feeling abandoned, we can react in one of two ways. We either push and we would withdraw in this case, and that's me. I always say I'm the person who does that first. Or we get clingy. And so we cling on, but I need you to answer me. Why can't you, but I love you and I need you and I want this. And it feels like, get off me, right? Because we're trying to stop that feeling of being abandoned and rejected. And depending on our childhood experiences, we react in one of those two ways. So when we can see that in a partner, we can map that, we can observe it. It's like, how do you approach it and say to them, you know what, I've noticed this, right? And you asked this before, Nathan, about the whole, how do you kind of bring those things up? Because it can be quite difficult. And I'm going to say to you, you need to do it by giving a shit sandwich, okay? You have to start with the good thing, tell them the bad thing in the middle, and finish with something else that was really awesome. Like, I love you, darling. You look really good today. I really noticed, though, before when I said that thing about taking the rubbish out, like and you do that every time I talk about something like that. And I'm just concerned because I've noticed the pattern and I really want to help us work this out. But I really appreciate the fact that you've always been open with me about how we can work our challenges through, right? Because usually what happens is we go, you're a psycho. You get off the beam every time I talk about taking the rubbish out. Like, why are you such an idiot? And then off you go, right? And it's hurtful. You're just throwing more at this person when you can already see that it's a problem. So the communication part of it is noticing that it's come up and then kind of going, oh, red flag. Oh, there's that red flag again. Oh, yeah, she doesn't seem to notice that she's got the same red flag every time. Okay, I could react to this, or I could kind of go, I'm just going to let that one simmer down and we'll address that one later. And I think it's a really important thing to do, because sometimes when we're in that middle of that emotional reactivity, whatever we've been triggered in, it's impossible in that moment to hear the rational voice coming in and kind of going, oh, you've gone psycho again. I noticed this is the same. You do this. Nobody appreciates that, do they?
No.
And you're not in a place to hear that.
No, you're not. No. And so it can be a bit challenging. I think noticing patterns is probably one of the things. And how do you feed the pattern observation back? I remember I had an issue with my mum that went back, I'm going to say 5 or 6 years ago. And I didn't realise until my last partner said to me that it was the third year in a row. For the third year in a row, he had observed that from September, which is when this thing first started, until November, which when it finished, every year I would kind of go through this issue and start kind of focusing on this thing with my mum. And it was really bizarre, but it was like after the third year when he said, yeah, you do this every September to November.
Wow.
And I went, oh, yeah, so I do. All right, I better sort that out before we hit September
next year. You had a season. You had a predictable season and pattern. I think that's true. Sometimes we can see things in our partner that they struggle to see in themselves, or that we can't see for ourselves. I mean, we've all got these blind spots. But yeah, I think developing the language to communicate the observation of a pattern and how we might be able to develop a better pattern of behavior is a really interesting one. What would you say is the first step?
I think the first step is, one, giving your partner permission to observe it, right? So going back to what I said about when I had that more self-awareness, and I said to this new partner, well, this is what I know about myself. And so I fully give you permission to call me out on it. And so then when he did call me out on it, I was able to kind of stop. I didn't react at that point. I just kind of went, oh, right, okay, let me come back to that, because I needed the time to work it out. And I think it's giving them permission, and also I want to say some insight and understanding that you're not just ignoring a problem, that you want to work it out, but it takes a little bit of time and introspection to do that. And I think this is where therapy comes in, or some level of coaching, because sometimes we think we know why we're reacting to a particular thing, but it's not until you talk it out loud with somebody else, or you go through the thing where you kind of go, oh, I see the pattern, right? I can observe the pattern for myself, actually, about every time my partner does blah, I react to that and I get upset about that. So then I've got to look at it and go, what is it about what they've said? Like, what's it triggering within me, my sense of feeling not lovable or not wanted or whatever it is that I've then reacted to? And how do I have the conversation where I kind of say, look, every time you make that comment or say whatever it is, it makes me feel, because this is the thing, when we want to have a difficult conversation, we have to get the language right. We have to couch it from our own perspective. So I'm aware that every time you make the comment about taking the rubbish out, that I'm getting upset about blah. And I would really appreciate it if next time, could we try and come to a solution that means that there's no comment made about me taking the rubbish out, kind of thing. Like, it seems really simplistic to look at it that way, but it's just, we don't get what we don't ask for, right? And going back to the thing that I said about when we have this reaction and it's kind of like, what's wrong? Nothing, I'm fine, We really need to take ownership of the fact that we're not fine. What we really should be saying is, yeah, I don't know, can I get back to you?
Yeah.
I don't know, but I need some more time to figure it out. And when I have,
That's right.
I'll be back.
Yeah. And I think it's taking ownership of the fact that if you've had a really strong reaction to something, to the sense that it's made you withdraw or whatever it is, that you have an obligation to provide that feedback. You've got to take ownership of the things that are upsetting you. And I think as human beings, that's the biggest challenge that we've got to kind of understand and overcome. If I'm upset, there's something within me that's reacted to something that somebody else did. It's not they made me upset.
Yeah. I really love that you've shared that.
I think it's good to be like an investigator. You kind of go, something weird triggered me there. What was that about? And trying to unpack it, but trying to unpack it from you, not what everybody else did to you, right? You have to take that responsibility and that onus. I always say, you're the one that's in the driver's seat of your life, right? This is the analogy I use for therapy. And me as your therapist is not your chauffeur. I am your driving instructor. So you need to learn to drive your own life, right?
Yeah.
Love that.
Hey, Kerry, so much of what we've talked about today has been about being the change and taking accountability for your own shit, really, and taking accountability for being the change that you want to see in your own life and in your relationship. But we also talk about being the change that we want to see in the bigger world. So to say thank you for joining us, we've provided a month's worth of childhood education for a class in Kenya. So we want to say thank you so much for making that possible.
Excellent.
Yeah, we've done that via our partnership with Buy One, Give One, which we know you're also a member.
Yeah, B1G1 partnerships are always wonderful. And I think it's wonderful to feel like what you're doing is also giving back to somebody else who doesn't necessarily have the same opportunities that we have. So thank you both for inviting me. And I'm really glad that there was some positive bits out of it. If people want to find out more, they can go to my website, which is kerryhoward.com.au. Or if you follow me on socials, I'm just going to say I'm really not very good on my socials. Probably need
well, you've told us that they're not great for us ananyway. But tell us, where can we find you?
You can follow Instagram at Kerry Howard Psych, PSYCH. So you can find me there or on Facebook as well. But yeah, my website's probably got more useful bits and pieces. But yeah, thank you. And I hope that was just really useful for people listening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kerry. Thanks heaps for joining us. If you love what we're doing here and want more, subscribe to the Date Forever podcast to make sure you never miss an ep. Come and hang out with us and other awesome couples who are fueling up their relationships in the Thriving Couples Collective Facebook group, or check us out at fuelcollective.com.au. Until next time, keep on dating, because better relationships equal a better world.